Welcome, everyone. Find your seats. My name is Elizabeth Thompson. I am the Farsi Chair of Islamic Peace here at the School of International Service. Thank you for coming to the annual Farsi Lecture in Islamic Peace. The Farsi Lecture series provides my name is Elizabeth Thompson. Leading voices from the Muslim world to our campus, as you all well know, filtering through the news media and other forms of media to the annual Farsi Lecture, voices from abroad, and know the Farsi Lecture Center provides my name is Elizabeth Thompson. Leading voices and a deep honor to our campus, as you all well know. Welcome. Filtering through the news media and other forms of media to the annual senior fellow from abroad, and know the Farsi Lecture Center welcome. I am Ruben, news media and thank you from the media to the for your fellow and know the Farsi Lecture welcome. I am Ruben, news media and thank you from the media to the for your fellow and know the Farsi Lecture welcome. I am Ruben, news media and thank you from the media to the for your fellow and know the Farsi Lecture welcome. I am Ruben, news media and thank you from the media for your
2016 to 2020, at the age of 40, the youngest prime minister in Tunisia's history, and the longest serving post-revolution. Prior to being prime minister, he was the Minister of Local Affairs, and before that, a Secretary of State in the Ministry of Agriculture. Dr. Shahid holds a PhD in agricultural economics in 2003 in Paris, where he wrote his dissertation on what is now a very timely topic of tariffs on agricultural goods. So I hope someone asks him about that as well. He is now at Harvard at the Middle East Initiative since 2022. During Shahid's tenure as prime minister, he had to deal with a number of challenges. Foremost among them was counterterrorism. Tunisia had been struck by 3 major terrorist attacks in 2015 and one in 2016 prior to Shahid taking office. He also had to deal with anti-corruption. He led a war on corruption in which his popularity skyrocketed to 80%. He had to deal with economic challenges in which he was stuck between a powerful labor union on the one hand and powerful businessmen on the other. And he had to deal, of course, with Tunisia's tricky political system where you have a prime minister and a president, as well as this strange bedfellows coalition where Islamists and secularists were brought together in the same government. And so here to tell us how he navigated all of that and managed to stay in office for 4 years, Dr. Youssef Shahid.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. Deeply honored to be here today. Thank you, Professor Griwal, for the invitation, for the warm welcome. Professor Griwal is the best scholar now of Tunisia. You need to be happy with that. You know, you have everything here. I don't know if I will add much to all his knowledge. And thank you again for that. So I'm Youssef Shahid. I'm the former Prime Minister of Tunisia, 2016-2020. I'm currently a senior fellow at the Middle East Initiative at Harvard University. And back in 2010, when the Arab Spring started, you know, when Mohamed Bouazizi immolated himself in Sidi Bouzid, 200 kilometers from Tunis, and this act sparked a protest, not only in Tunisia, but throughout the Arab world. It was a major event at the time that really shaken the Arab world. And the uprising that happened led to the collapse of long-standing authoritarian regimes in Tunisia, but also in Egypt, in Yemen, in Libya. This is what was called the Arab Spring. And at that time, I was moved by thousands of Tunisians, and I decided to go back to my country in order, my idea was to contribute to the building of this young democracy. But of course, I was not expecting that I would become the prime minister of the country. But more important, and this maybe what I will discuss, I was not expecting that the building of the democracy will be much more difficult than just removing the agent. So, few weeks after the Arab Spring in Tunisia, as I mentioned, we saw Hosni Mubarak collapsing power in Egypt and Libya and Yemen, etc. And in Tunisia, there was no leadership for this revolution. The revolution was done by the young generation asking for dignity, for freedom. I don't think that the Tunisians are really asking for democracy per se. This is a very important point for me, and it can explain a little bit what the trajectory later. I think people that went to the street, they were looking more for a better distribution of the wealth. And you can see the same thing that happened in Tunisia or in Egypt, despite there are a lot of differences, but there are similarities in explaining the reason of that. In these countries, always you have a divide between the rich and the poor, between Tunisia, at least between the inner area of the country and the coastal area of the country. People were asking for dignity, for a better redistribution of the wealth, for more equality. And I think this was maybe in Tunisia, the elite who was looking for democracy per se, with all the values that include democracy. But I think the mass population in Tunisia was looking more for, as I mentioned, more social justice, more jobs, etc. And I will explain how this later impacted the economic trajectory of the country and also the political trajectory. So I think at that time in 2011, many scholars knew that there were like few chances for the Tunisian democracy to succeed, but there was a lot of enthusiasm. The revenue per capita was very low, I think less than $5,000 per capita. But there, Tunisia can be considered as a unique country, secular country, with 99% of Muslim population, but with long tradition of secularism and tolerance, long history of reformism in Tunisia, from the University of Zaytuna and even before. And those are things that I think that might explain also, because I consider that we lived during 10 years in the democratic regime. Tunisia was free. There were free and fair elections. No one was contesting the elections. Media was free. There was a free press. So, I mean, some are calling that the dark decade. I'm not sure if it was that decade. The dark decade was in Algeria, by the way, where there were like 100,000 persons who were killed during the confrontation between the extremist terrorist groups and the government, depending on how you call that. But then in Tunisia, now many call that the dark decade. It was not dark. It was a period with a lot of difficulties, but then it was not dark. So what went wrong in this experience, in this decade of a democratic experience? First, let me say that building a democracy is not something easy, especially in a not a Muslim country. You don't have many examples. So because you have to deal with a secular state, we saw the rising of political Islam movement after the Arab Spring, not only in Tunisia, but also in Egypt, in Morocco, in Jordan. So this was not easy to manage, to find a balance between the old regime, between the new forces that appeared also after the revolution. So building a democracy first is not something easy. Building a democracy in Muslim Arab country was something new, or as I mentioned, that there is no many experience. So this create many difficulties that prevent you from progressing at the speed that you want. Second, this democracy was born with a negative international environment. Not all, I mean, representative democracy are in difficult condition, not only in Tunisia or all around the world, with the rise of populism, with the rise of social networks, and this combination between populism and social networks that really create, it's a threat, I think, for even long-standing democracies. Also, building a democracy after a revolution. This is what happened in Tunisia. We tried to build this democracy after a revolution. I'm not sure that the easiest way, and I'm not channeling theoretical aspects, but then I think there are 2 points that make it much more difficult. Number one is that you don't have a good political class, because the people that are involved politically in the dictatorship regime are courageous people. They confront the dictator, but then turning to build the democracy, turning to build the country, to run a ministry, this is something different. And I think, and it's not only in Tunisia, by the way. I mean, in Syria, after Bashar al-Assad left, I can see what is the Syrian political class? Because the dictator usually never keep emerging any political class. But then you have people that fight for human rights, which is not easy, you know. This is what we have now in Tunisia or in other countries. But then you need another political class maybe to build democracy. Because in the dictatorship regime, people are not involved, politically speaking. So you have only small category that fight for human rights and other things like that. So this is make it more difficult. Second thing is, again, I think in the perception of the Tunisian who did the revolution, it was not for the democracy. It was for, as I mentioned, jobs, better social redistribution, fighting the corruption that is perceived within the family of the dictator, either in Tunisia, Ben Ali, or Mubarak in Egypt, or Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. So there was not, I'm not sure that there is really democratic culture and people, I mean, at least in the, let's say, in the population. Maybe the elite and the Tunisian elite were looking, and there was kind of alignment at the point of the elite and the population, but it was just for a certain period. So this is, I think, the first point about building a democracy, which is not something easy. Now, I think also we did many mistakes in the beginning that I call startup mistakes. So in Tunisia, for example, we decided to write a new constitution. I think now, looking back, I think it was a mistake. Because why? Of course, it's very good to have a new constitution, but then I think there's a momentum. And by the way, the same for Syria. There is a momentum. I think after 3 years writing, or 3 years and a half writing the new constitution, we lost the momentum because the revolution started in December 17, 2010. And then the constitution was drafted, approved in January 2014. And I remember, you know, during my electoral campaign in 2014, I mean, people were asking, okay, what this constitution will change in my life? What this will help me for, you know? It was an achievement for us, but then people were waiting for more results. And by the way, I think a constitution will not prevent you from a democratic backsliding. Because you see, the Tunisian president now uses the Article 80 of this constitution to close the parliament and remove the government and run by decree. He used the constitution that we thought one of the best constitutions in the world. And by the way, this constitution was good. A lot of innovative things were in this constitution, a lot of positive things, but, and this will bring me later to the point of the behavior of political actors. It is how the political actors behave with this constitution that is more important, I think, than the constitution itself. Of course, I'm talking from a practical point of view, and I can give many examples. So I think we did some mistakes in the beginning. writing a new constitution. We lost momentum. What could we do? We could like make a commission of technical experts and change the 2, 3, 4 articles that the previous dictator was using to control the justice or security forces or to implement his dictatorship. We could do that and win a lot of time. Because also finding this balance, as I mentioned, politically, this also distract us from the economic side. As I mentioned, again, finding the population are always looking to a revolution at the end is a social explosion. So a lot of social, we saw that in Tunisia immediately after the revolution. People were asking for being hired in the public service, more social transfer, more state, more social state interference, etc. So I think many mistakes were done writing a new constitution. The constitution itself, when we start to implement that, and by the way, this is what happened to me because we voted the constitution in January 2014, and I arrived to the government in August 2015, and I was in charge of to implement this constitution because the constitution, those are the principles, values, etc. And by the way, we have a constitution with 200 articles compared to the US one. It's much more simple and maybe much more efficient than the one we have. So I'll give you many examples. So the political system that we use it coming from this constitution, I think the constitution was written with the spirit of avoiding any power concentration, to avoid the reputation of the dictatorship. This is how the Tunisian constitution was. The people who wrote it in 2011 and 2014, I think their goal was to avoid any repetition of the concentration of power, which is a good intention. But it ended with no one was governing this country because by dispersing powers, we give power to the prime minister, to the parliament, to the president of the republic. We created 7 or 8 constitutional institutions in charge of the election, in charge, some were working very well, others were, just, and at the end, we don't know who's accountable for that. Who is responsible of that, The idea, many examples, for example, in my government, if I wanted to appoint a minister, I need to have the vote of the political parties. If I want to remove him, I can remove him, but again, I need to go through this process. And going through this process, it means that you don't choose the best person for this job, but the person who can get the vote. You can get the vote and not be the best person. The vote is more important than the skills, and this reduces the efficiency of the government and reduce the leadership of the prime minister because many ministers they think that the president of this party or of this political party are more powerful than the prime minister or than the president of the republic. So I think we created a political system that really dispersed powers. The justice also, for example, we tried to create a system where the executive has zero interference in the justice. And why we did that? Because the dictator used the justice to jail opponent, etc. But then we ended with a system that was not freely functioning. We asked the judge, after being under the executive system, to self-organize themselves. They failed doing that after the revolution. And we have a system that was not efficient, and people start to see that. So I think this is also very important in the building of, the spirit was positive, the idea was to avoid power concentration, but then we avoided with a fragmented political system. The electoral code also that we choose in Tunisia, because writing a constitution, we wanted that everyone participate to the writing of this constitution. Then we tried to make an electoral code that enabled a large participation. But then after that, there was no possibility to have a majority for any political party. And that's why we have this consensus between the Islamist and the secular or progressive camp in Tunisia, because no one was able to run the country and to have a clear majority, So I think the political system also make it much more difficult for governing.
Another point that explains maybe the bad choices from the beginning, or it is about the transitional justice. This is a crucial point. We failed in Tunisia in the transitional justice. We failed. So what happened when you fail in this? Why it is important to succeed in the transitional justice? To avoid again the repetition, to understand what are the mechanisms, the tools that the dictator was using in order to avoid the repetition again. In Tunisia, for many reasons, we never succeed in that. And by failing in that, we start to see the same people that were close to the old regime reappearing and being more present in politics, also in business. And this also, and not only people, but also we see the same method, the same governance type, and reappeared after a few years. So people start to have a kind of disillusion about the revolution, that I think we were not enough revolutionary after the revolution, not for cutting heads and doing things like that. But then I think some people close to the old regime, and I can give an example about the media. If you look at the ownership of the media in Tunisia, before the revolution and after the revolution, we have the same owner. How can you own a media under a dictatorship regime if you don't work for this regime? And then you are supposed to promote democracy. So the media played a negative role by being owned by the same, but because there was no transitional justice, you know. Same thing in many other areas. Economically speaking now, we did a huge mistake again by hiring 200,000 persons in the public service immediately after the revolution. Because again, a revolution is a social explosion. There was immediately after 2011, there was people in the street demonstrating, asking for jobs. So what the government did under this pressure? They hired 200,000 persons. So then we need to pay the monthly bill. So we went to the IMF. So we entered in this cycle of inflation, debt, etc. And this impacted the economic trajectory of the country. I think we could do other choices. It's not easy, of course, because the governments at that time, they were under huge pressure, demonstration everywhere in Tunisia. It was in all regions, people were asking for some. They were not able to explain, to wait, etc. And this impacted the economic trajectory, that also impacted the political trajectory. So, but those are difficulties. Maybe we can say that many revolution or post-revolution period can experience. I think also what happened is what really exacerbated with these difficulties and with the distrust with the population was the behavior of the political actors. When I say political actors, it's prime minister, president, unions, security forces, all those actors really. I think the behavior was not positive. Of course, this happened in a period where there was a huge rise of populism. Many political factions in Tunisia were using populist speech. At a crucial time, we missed many opportunities. I'll give you another example, the Constitutional Court. Why Tunisia has no Constitutional Court? Maybe if we had a Constitutional Court, maybe the trajectory will be different today, but then the political party in the parliament, they need to find an arrangement to vote to elect this the Constitutional Court. It was supposed to be elected in 2015, but in 2021, when President Kais Saied closed the parliament, there was no Constitutional Court. 6 years, and there was a failure in electing this Constitutional Court. I'm not sure that it will change the project, but at least you could have a constitutional voice or opinion, or that can change the balance of power. So the behavior of political actors, I think, was exacerbated those difficulties, ending with the distrust between the political class and the population, ending with what I'm calling kind of democratic fatigue. People were really exhausted with what's happening in the country. When Kais Saied in July 2021 closed the parliament and removed the government, people were somehow happy because they seen this parliament that was supposed to be really the focal point of the democracy. It became a point of
conflict, arrogance, dispute between member of parliament, and this happened during the COVID crisis, where Tunisians were dying with lack of oxygen and vaccines. And I think at that time, people, I mean, no one was expecting how things will evolve, including Kaysad himself. I'm not sure he was expecting that things will evolve in this direction. But this, I think, if we go back and we try to analyze, there is a huge responsibility of the political class in what happened. The political class was not enough serious in addressing the problem of the country. The political party were not strong enough in order to propose solid and strong ideas or program or solution for the country. It was we lost this freedom that we had for 10 years. I think the elite is responsible somehow about that. And by the way, Kaysad is enjoying that. Everything was prepared for him. Everything was prepared by what I was saying, all those things, the rise of populism, the lack of seriousness, etc. This prepared him. And when he arrived in July 2021 and he did that, people were happy because they thought that there was a new wave of revolution, because, I mean, everyone was seeing what I'm talking about and was tired a little bit of that. So the ground was prepared for him. If you look to the slogans or the arguments of the political parties, all of them were taken by Kaysad. The rejection of the West, the rejection of the IMF, the fight against corruption. All those are arguments of the main political parties. Everything is because of the Islamists. So let's put the Islamists in jail. This is what he did, and people are happy. Everything is because of the old regime. Let's put them in jail, but everyone is happy. People were prepared to hear this speech. What he did, that he acted on this point, and this is how he gets some support. And by the way, he was also part of the problem in 2021, because he was elected in 2019 and he did that in 2021. But he succeeded in taking distance from that. And today, he's not responsible for anything. And I think this is the point. I mean, despite the situation in the country, he succeeded to take a distance about everything's happening in the country, in this connection of social network populism and new revolutionary, false revolutionary ideas. I mean, I can talk for hours about this, and I wanted just to, I think so, to understand where we are today. And if you would like to look to the future positively, it is important to really analyze what happened during this decade. And everyone take responsibility, including myself, of course, when I'm saying that. And also, I ran the government for 3 years and a half. I'm sure I did mistakes, and I mean, but then I think what is missing now in Tunisia is a debate for this decade. What happened, what went wrong, including all the political factions that were present. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. This was an insightful conversation. I found it hard to disagree, honestly, with anything that you've raised here in terms of the Constitution. You're focusing on it, as well as creating this Constitution where power was dispersed and therefore nothing could get done, and perhaps not solving the initial grievances that led to the revolution. And so I want to ask about one of those grievances, which was anti-corruption. And you led a very successful war on corruption early in your tenure, where you had several political figures who were even close to your own political party at the time, Nida Tunis, arrested on charges of corruption. And this, I think, won you a lot of popularity, and it is in many ways the same driver of support for Kaysad in his crackdown. Certainly, he has expanded the definition of who is corrupt, all of the parties and all of the businessmen, all of the NGOs. But in many ways, it's the same demand that he's tapping into. So I want to ask you about this war on corruption that you led. What happened in that process? What led you to abandon that war on corruption after a few months when initially from the outside it seemed to be going well?
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. This is a very important question. I think corruption, of course, corruption was one of the most important requests during the revolution, because people, the revolution was done against Ben Ali regime and his family that were corrupted. So fight against corruption was something very important. And I think between 2011 and 2016, there was not a serious fight against corruption. And you can follow all the IPC international index of transparency. You see, we lost many points in the beginning. And by the way, today, Kayside is fighting the corruption, and the Tunisian ranking is the worst in the history. It was released like a few days ago. I think we were like 93, ranked 93 in the world. During my time, we were 72, because now it's talking about the dark decade and all of them corrupted. So this year is one of the worst in the Tunisian history. So corruption was something very important for the Tunisian people. At least they wanted to fight against corruption, and they felt that the state is not serious in fighting corruption because you have big names that are still the same, influent people, and that's why I say that transitional justice is important, because the transitional justice should be in charge of that, and this was not done. In 2015, we start to see people coming back or to the affairs, people from the old regime, etc., still influent here and there in business community. So this was not done properly by the IVD, which is the instance in charge of the transitional justice. So when I arrived, I was feeling this pressure of the population. And when we did the first arrest in May 2017, I was very popular. People came into my office demonstrating support for me because of this, and I became very popular for 2 years because of the fight against corruption. But what does mean the fight against corruption? It's not arresting people. This is not the role of the government. Maybe the difference with Kayside is I try to do a fight against the corruption in a democratic environment. I try to respect the justice, the separation between the legislative and the executive, which is not the case now. But this also showed limits in my. I mean, we could not do anything. I wanted the justice to be in charge of this. The government has to give tools to prepare the laws to send laws to the parliament, but the justice failed to do that. So people get after maybe 1 or 2 years, people were asking me, "Where is the fight against corruption?" We did the whole framework, legal framework that exists today in Tunisia. All the legal framework was done during our government. When I arrived to the government, there was no law. Fighting corruption is not by arresting people. So we did all this, conflict of interest laws, declaration of assets of political people before they enter in office. We create a judicial poll unit for financial cases, etc., etc. And by the way, the prime minister who came after me, yes, was removed because one of these laws, and people in this government were attacking my government for not doing anything, but they collapsed because one of the law that we voted during my mandate. Anyway, so fighting corruption is also about education. So people with this rise of populism, they want only to see corruption at the level of minister, president, prime minister. Corruption also is down, It is at the level of the average citizen who gave something to get this paper or this document. So I think maybe he saw the experience that we had, and he's trying to do differently. The main difference, it is the justice. By controlling the justice, when you claim, that this one is corrupted, they arrested him in the minute. So we sent files to the justice, but the justice was not reactive, was under influence, and there was no reform of the judiciary system in Tunisia.
Ask you about civil society. One of the common arguments we hear about why Tunisia became a democracy in the first place was because of its strong civil society, in particular the labor union that has a long history in Tunisia, big legitimacy from this fight against from France and the independence movement. And this labor union played an important role in the transition, helped to bring all the parties to the table and find consensus over the Constitution. But since then, civil society has in many ways been absent in terms of resisting, as I say it, post 2021. I mean, the labor union most recently called a general strike and then abandoned it. Its leader resigned and then he rescinded that and he stayed. So how do you view civil society today? Were we wrong the whole time? It was never as strong as we thought it was? Or did something happen to civil society in these 10 years?
No, I think civil society, what I was calling political actors, is one of those actors. And what happened to them happened to all the other. Let's talk about UGTT, which is the main powerful trade union in Tunisia. They played a positive role in the beginning. They played a very positive role in the beginning when there was no political party. The UGTT was the leader in front of the Islamists to find a kind of balance, and I believe that this helped the experience to continue. And it kept room for an alternative possible for the 2014 election, which was not the case in Egypt when the Islamists won with 71% in the 2012 election. So there was no room for alternative in Tunisia. The UGTT, pending the formation of Nida Tunis, who was the secular party that made the balance with the Islamists, I think they played a positive role, globally speaking. But then they lost this because they lost their core role. You know, their role is not doing politics. The union became a really political actor. And by the way, they won the Nobel Prize in 2015. I think this was a mistake. You know, the Tunisian population should have won this Nobel Prize, because when we gave this for a union, the union became so strong. You know, we protect the country, we save the country. So we need to have ministers appointed in the government. We need to have a director appointed there. So they interfere. They're having a lot of interference in the government, in politics, and they lost. And by the way, what happened to them today is they lost their credibility, because people understand that the union, or they're not really fighting for them. Give you a concrete example. After the revolution in Tunisia, we saw many social forces. In the beginning, they were around the UGTT. Those many young people, you know, unions of educated, non-employed people. I mean, we saw thousands of organizations taking advantage of this new environment of freedom and the absence of fear, etc., that happened after the revolution. In the beginning, these forces were around UGTT, and UGTT was defending them. I remember in my discussion with UGTT is officially representing workers in the public sector or in private companies. But then they were talking about other people, defending them. This helped them to enlarge their scope and their coverage, you know, and when they need to demonstrate, they bring these people with them. You know? But over the years, this population, mainly young people, understand that there is UGTT was not really defending them. By the way, those people moved to Qais Said today. Many of them are supporting him. And this is explain a little bit why the country is quiet and there is no social demonstration like before. You know, during my time, there were like 10,000 movements a year. Can you believe that? How the government can function with 10,000 protests? I mean, because this environment of freedom and everyone can do that. So, but over the years, the civil society lost their credibility. For union, this is for union, but also for many NGOs, we see then, you know, that they were not really working for the benefit of the population. Many NGOs turned to be political a few weeks before the election. We saw many of them. We saw that. Aish Tunsi, Khalil Tunis, all those NGOs officially presented to the population to help them, to bring them things, etc. Then, a few weeks before the elections, they became political parties, taking advantage of the weakness of the law that was in this period post-revolution. So they lost credibility, and that's what explained today their situation, why they are not able to move the street or because the people understand that they were too much politicized, and they were working either for political parties or or for their own leader, you know, and we saw so many examples.
In a policy school here at the School of International Service, where we are thinking about the US's role in the world and what impact the US can have. And when we think about the US and Europe, for that matter, and their role in the transition, I think we hear a lot of criticism that they didn't do enough, that they didn't present a Marshall Plan to really help Tunisia and the other Arab Spring states deliver economically for the population. Most of the increase in US aid that we saw actually went to the Tunisian military, not for the economy. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on what more you think the US could have done in these last 10 years. How much of the weight would you place on perhaps not enough international support for the transition? And if I can also make it into a two-part question, I mean, in terms of what the US can do today, try to help the opposition or to help a return to democracy in Tunisia. I mean, over the weekend, you had a dual citizen, Olfa Hamdi, a US Tunisian politician arrested upon arrival in Tunisia. Is there a constructive role you think the US can play today in terms of helping to create space for opposition in Tunisia?
I think, though, globally speaking, the Western countries tried to help the Tunisian democracy. You remember Deauville in 2011. You know, that was $80 billion announced for Tunisia and Egypt, if I am right. And first I arrived to the office, I was looking, where's this money? You know, this money was not there, to be honest. So, but there was strong support, political support. Tunisia really was elevated to another dimension. You know, we are now non-NATO ally of the United States. This was signed in 2015. We are an ally for fighting terrorism. So we receive a lot, at least in the fight against terrorism, in the military side. I mean, United States and Europe helped a lot Tunisia. I think the economic side, to give you an idea about that, we were under the Ben Ali regime. We used to receive like $200 million loans from Europe, for example. Let's talk about Europe, because Europe is main. I come back to the US, but Europe is the main supporter, or historically, our trade relation are 80% with Europe. So we used to receive $200 to $250 million per year before. After the revolution, it went to $350 million, which is $100 million more. Which is, you know, if you look like 27 countries in Europe, which is peanuts, which is nothing. And European also were not enough aware that, you know, they can do much more. You know, Tunisia needed a bridge, you know, to move, because when you move from this stable regime, virtually stable regime of Ben Ali to this revolution, etc., you have, as I mentioned, a lot of social demand, social requests. People are taking advantage of this freedom, etc. It's a very difficult period. I think we missed the first years. We could really have like a bridge in order to avoid all this. I mean, we were discussing with the IMF like a normal country, how to explain to the IMF that we have a revolution and we're building a democracy. It is not something that you find on the IMF boxes, you know, but this was the reality. And there was a situation in Libya with the collapse of Gaddafi, etc. So I think we could have much more push here. Economically speaking, I think US and Europe could also offer us more foreign direct investment and also more access market, or market access to our exports, to at least reduce the impact of those IMF agreement and World Bank agreement, etc. I think there was some thinking in the West that Tunisia did the first election in 2011, second election in 2014, another election in 2019. I thought that, khalas, the democracy is there, it's okay. They succeeded in having 3 elections, so they are on the good track, which was not true. This stability was really virtual. And I spent 3 years and a half in government. It looks like I'm the longest one to serve, but you know, the government was failing every 2 minutes, you know, because you have this party or these groups in the parliament saying tomorrow we'll vote, we'll make a confidence vote against the government. So it was really a fragile situation. So I think the Western countries can do much more than they did, but also don't forget that the Arab Spring turned to be, there was the burning of the US Embassy in Libya, in Tunisia, with the rise of those extremist movement, the killing of the US Ambassador Christopher in Libya. So, I mean, this also make it much more difficult, to progress. And I think we need a better mutual understanding and partnership based on those lessons learned. There are a lot of lessons learned dealing with international donors, but also international. Then, regarding what they can do, I mean, again, I am partisan of saying that if we failed, it is our fault. I can't say that. I see many Tunisian politicians, they blame the West or the Gulf countries. I think we failed because the behavior of our political actors in crucial moment was positive in some. I give you an example of positive behavior. The Tunisian army, for example, during this period of where there was the Sisi overthrew Morsi in Egypt. So there were calls in Tunisia. Many people were calling the army to do the same thing in Tunisia. They asked the army in 2013 to remove the Nahda Islamist government in Tunisia. The army didn't react to that. I consider it a positive. But then look to this behavior over the years. UGTT, as I mentioned, they played a positive role in the beginning, but then after 2015, they were blocking every reform that the government was doing, and they were strong because of this Nobel Prize and the situation, etc. I think if we failed, it is the behavior of political actors not voting a constitutional code. I remember another example when there was the vote of the law against terrorism in Tunisia. You have like 25 members in the parliament that didn't vote for that. How can you don't vote for a so important law? Tunisia was attacked by terrorist attacks many times, during this period. They said that this is a conspiracy from the West, etc. So everyone was. So you have many examples where at crucial moments we failed in 2019 to unite around one candidate. So we were to this election in 2019. There was like 7 or 8 candidates with my own camp and my own party, and 3 from my own government. This is not a serious behavior. If we were united, of course, we could win the election and Qais maybe So if you look to those crucial moments, I can see many failure in the behavior of this political class. And this explains at least 80% to our situation today. Again, it was not easy to build this democracy, but then I hope that there are many lessons learned in our political class. This is the problem. You will not invent another political class unless you have more young involvement, I hope, in the future.
I have time for one final question, and I'll open it up to the audience. What do you view as the future in Tunisia? Do you foresee there might be a return to democracy in the short term, or does it? I mean, when we think about Qais Said's popularity today, presumably it has dipped, but I imagine he remains likely as the most popular figure still in Tunisia. Many of his supporters are saying he should run for a 3rd term. His 1st term shouldn't count because it was under the old constitution. I mean, it doesn't seem like, pessimistically from the outside, that there might be a return, but I'm curious to hear your perspective in terms of what you see moving forward. What would it take to return to democracy in Tunisia?
Yeah, I think, of course, the conditions are difficult because, as I mentioned, the environment, the people were prepared. There was like, during this decade, even before Qais Said arrived to power, there was a huge rise of populism in the Tunisian political class. Remember the parliament when the government was going to, I was not able to discuss serious things with including not only the opposition, but including party of the government. They were under pressure from their constituents, from their people. So, I'll give you an example. You remember this law in Tunisia asking to employ anyone who is unemployed for the last 10 years, no matter what is his background. This was a law that was voted, in Tunisia. We have like 1/3 of uneducated people in Tunisia are owning a degree from a higher degree, So they make a huge pressure. This is not a serious law, for the government. How can we implement something like that? I have to hire everyone because he is like unemployed for the last 10 years as government. So I think the political party were not prepared. They were not offering something serious. So now, for the future, I think we're not doing this job to see what are the lessons learned. We are okay. We are fighting against Kayside opposition, but then there is no mea culpa, no aggiornamento of what happened. And I was calling for that, including for myself. For sure, many of them they say you are responsible for that. But then there was no serious debate about what happened, what are the mistakes. And I'm happy to discuss that with anyone seriously. The debate is really fake in Tunisia. It's based on fake debate. I gave you another behavior of the political class in Tunisia. We killed the oil and gas industry. We killed by populism of the political class. I give you something very important. In 2010, Ben Ali regime, how was this regime doing 5% growth and claiming that? 50% of the foreign investment was coming in the oil and gas. Tunisia used to produce 100,000 barrels per day. It's not Libya, it's not Algeria, but 100,000 was exactly what we need. Today, we are producing 30,000 barrels per day. How this happened? Because of the politician. They start to say, we have a big campaign in Tunisia called Winul Petrol. What is my oil? So everyone was saying, we need to have a better redistribution of the oil, and politicians jumped on that. And we wrote an article in the Constitution, Article 13, preventing any foreign company to come and to make exploration unless you meet, I don't know how many conditions. This killed the Tunisian exploration industry. That's how we moved from 100,000 to 30,000. Imagine, so if you don't make exploration, your level of production decline, and then you go to the IMF to look for money. So those are, again, politicians that broke that, they created that, they make this campaign saying to people, you are rich. And by the way, those are slogans of Kayside today, saying that the country is rich, but the politician took the money and the economic elite is corrupted. So we prepared, the ground was prepared by the political class. So I hope that everyone takes responsibility of that. I hope we could have a serious debate. And again, I think the only hope for me is coming from the young generation that grow during this decade, that will not accept any new authoritarian rules in this area of TikTok and YouTube. It's not possible. And we see many of them demonstrating. It's not big numbers, but I think there was a decade with many young people involved in NGOs, despite all the difficulties that I mentioned, it was very positive. And I hope that these people will lead the fight, much more than the old generation, if I may say, that played its role. And we need to help those young generation to continue and to support them. We see them very innovative. You don't know how, you don't expect where they will come. So I really trust this new generation to really lead the fight for freedom. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think let's open up the floor to questions. There's one mic here.